Hello, I'm Meghan P. Nolan, and this presentation is The Involuntary Mask of the Poet, Exploring the Poet Persona Through Contemporary Literature. The poet persona, hereafter referred to as poet with a capital P, has long been a subject of fascination and debate, from English poet Sir Philip Sidney's Defense of Poesy in 1595 to modernist fragmentation and the confessional conflation of the narrator and the poet self. Poets of every era have used a combination of the splintering of language and identity in order to consciously problematize our notions of native language and the unified self. Interestingly, though, the poet has traditionally been conflated with the collective consciousness of a given time frame or a defined movement during which they lived, whether it be modern, Harlem Renaissance, New York School, confessional, beats, language, etc. Even though the persona itself endures long past these respective years, it often exists as something separate and or beyond the poet's written works. And so, while throughout history, the poet has been known by some pretty lofty monikers, the archaeologist who unearths human history, as Seamus Heaney tells us, the poems can be seen as digs for a find that end up being plants. The prophet, as Guthrie explains, works for the increase of beauty and good, which ultimately leads to joy. The reporter, who records what is gone, as Yeats reminds us in Fallen Majesty. The visionary, constantly reimagining the future. The fool and the priest, Burckhardt claims, because of their futile insistence upon absolving words of their bondage to meaning. The inventor of the arts of life and the teacher, as Shelley proclaims, they must approximate the agencies of the invisible world, and so much more. And at best, the poet is all of these things combined. But unfortunately, none of these designations, either on its own or as a group trait, has any significance in a contemporary society which values fleeting celebrity over the poet's identity, which is innately tied to their ability to preserve, extend, and improve language itself while raising an awareness of feeling. That is to say, despite poetry's prevalence in centuries past, the poet has not held a prominent purpose in society for quite some time, perhaps because of the post-Poundian insistence upon poetry, viewing poetry as elitist and or antiquated, has been compounded by existing norms of lingual designation and the ways in which people, particularly Westerners, have come to value identities. Because while the mechanisms by which the poet operates have not changed over the years, there has been a definitive reconstruction of the poet persona in relation to what Marshall et al. Tell us is the formation of the contemporary self, which is now constructed and displayed through technologies and forms of expression that express media forms. It is overtly telling, for instance, that in the United States, the general population is more interested in the fact that Amanda Gorman, the first National Youth Poet Laureate, received a modeling contract after her reading at the 46th president's inauguration than they are in her written identity. A fascination evinced by Gorman's recent appearance in the fashion magazine Vogue in April of 2021. The role of the poet is also unrealistically romanticized in similar terms. As W.H. Auden notes, the number of young people who regularly claim interest in poetry solely because they are under the illusion that in that profession they will be able to create even if their genuine desire is to make money. And what is surprising, he also says, is that such a high percentage of those without any marked talent for any profession should think of writing as a solution. The attraction of the poet, then, as with the musician, the actor, socialite, influencer, and the like, is rooted in the belief that they have somehow managed to sidestep the necessity of a lifetime of meaningless labor. There's truly little understanding of what the poet has become in the hypermodern because awareness has been principally focused on the ways in which the public figure of the poet has shifted over time in relation to celebrity status. But as Marshall et al. Explains, celebrity, despite its high visibility, is a subset of persona. In so many ways, it articulates and expresses persona, but it needs to be underlined that persona goes well beyond the structures and experiences of celebrity. And while poetics may have fallen out of favor, those characterizations of the poet within literature can help us to unravel the very elements of persona that are overshadowed by ephemeral trends. This is particularly true of depictions within the novel. As Bakhtin asserts, the novel is the only genre that was born and nourished in a new era of world history, and therefore is deeply akin to that era. Whereas other major genres, like poetry, entered that era as already fixed forms, as an inheritance, and only now are they adapting themselves, some better, some worse, to the new conditions of their existence. The novel, as an ever-developing genre, offers genuine reflection of modern individuals and society in ways that other written genres cannot. In this presentation, I'm going to briefly discuss the poet persona in P.D. James's Adam Dalgliesh mysteries. Dalgliesh is the perfect character to analyze in this respect, as he exists at the nexus of detective and poet, a contradiction embodied through a double persona, professional and celebrity, each taking on a life of its own. And Dalgliesh himself acknowledges the symbiotic nature of this pairing in A Shroud for a Nightingale when he says, "I've never thought of poetry and police work as needing to be reconciled in that ecumenical way." Interestingly, in a time when poets are no longer household names, Dalglish's own poetry is somehow widely read and understood. He frequently finds his books on the shelves of both victims and suspects alike, and because of this literary notoriety, others sensationalize his abilities as inspector as well. Because his celebrity is not of his own making, it raises questions about how this poet persona, or as Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa calls it, the involuntary mask of the poet, is cultivated beyond Dalglish's control as an articulation of the private self that is expressed through a public individual. It also serves as an exemplification of the delicacy of such performances, as they hinge on a promotion through what Marshall et al. Refer to as mediatization in order to exist and persist. The Adam Dalgliesh Mysteries by P.D. James consist of 14 novels spanning from 1962 to 2008. Unfortunately, because of time restrictions, I will only be discussing examples from a few of those today. However, for those of you who are interested in crime fiction, I will tell you that Adam Dalgliesh is considered a gentleman detective. But he also embodies some very common depictions of the poet as well. So he is described as having a stern, withdrawn self-absorption, as if he were stoically enduring a private pain. He notices the turns of phrase of others, and he has an uncanny ability to read between the lines. It is said that Dalgliesh is morbidly sensitive to every word, and it is this attention to detail that makes Dalgliesh an excellent detective. He assesses the language of usage of suspects, and the evidence he so carefully elicits is vital. His work with poetics further translates into extraordinary detection, as he often recognizes the omission of words, has total recall of what people say, and is able to analyze a single line in a poison pen letter like he does in The Black Tower in order to decipher intent. And perhaps it takes a good persona to know one. The poet is ultimately a performer in a lot of ways, and so he recognizes a well-rehearsed bit, as demonstrated in Shroud for a Nightingale and in The Black Tower. He is also aware of the need to avoid the obvious in detection. Because he's a poet, he even says himself, if you believe that the young and innocent need comfort and protection, you're thinking in cliches. And if you begin thinking in cliches, you end up writing in them. Although my research is far from complete at this stage, I can definitively tell you that the traits Dalgliesh exhibits are commensurate with what poets themselves have told us about the persona, albeit not directly. What we learn from T.S. Eliot, Pessoa, Yeats, and others is that the job of the poet is to be master of language and a performer, and Dalgliesh is precisely that. The poet persona truly revolves around the mastery of language and the ability to manipulate language in order to garner feeling and connection amongst individuals. And so the performance piece has become a necessary part of the facade in this day and age because it enables the poet to reach a greater audience. Unfortunately, a question of efficacy arises when it becomes obvious that it is also the very mechanism which prevents the average person from gaining a true appreciation and or understanding of the poet's message. But this is precisely why the analysis of the poet persona is important for the larger diversified persona studies framework, because it has clear implications beyond the literature itself. It serves as a lens through which we can not only better understand the role of the poet today, But we can also begin to evaluate those current cultural constructions, which have all but eliminated the poet from popular culture as well. So I hope you'll join me as I explore these thoughts more down the line, where I suspect we may discover in very poetic fashion that the poet may share some fault in their own downfall. Thank you so much.